to GPs, people like Marilyn. And I think actually we should listen to what Marilyn is saying, because she's actually saying that the new system is starting to work. She doesn't want enough people.
I want to just go to, I just want to hear a few more thoughts from the panel.
So then you set up machinery within every trust. How can it possibly be efficient for every trust to have the machinery that works up, going for tenders, constantly having to look for the business, losing business, changing the organisation? How is that possibly efficient? It isn't. When we were working with commissioners saying what are the needs now, many of the clinicians were the experts about the changing needs of their local population and evidence-based. This is what's needed, working with the commissioners, so the best, every penny is spent to the greatest effect.
Can I ask, I want Rob Webster to come in here. He's the Chief Executive of the NHS Confederation. You've obviously some experience of this. Just tell us which side of this you're on.
I've run an organisation that's been abolished because of the reforms. I've run an organisation that's been created because of the reforms. I've seen all sorts of things. I think the critical thing is, in my 25-year career, we spent a lot of time reforming the architecture. I think we had a conversation earlier about how do we get more value out of the money that we put into the NHS? How do we save £22 billion? We don't do that by messing about with the architecture. What we do is think about the way that care is delivered. Yeah, exactly. And we've got to deliver the best possible care for that resource.
Stop this argument, is your point. Think about something else.
Yes. And I think there's a reason why we need to stop the argument, and the reason is very straightforward. And let me just make the point. The reason is because the challenge when Alan Milburn was Health Secretary at the start of the Blair administration, he wanted to make the NHS more efficient. And he said basically what we need to do is to introduce competition and to allow someone who wants their hip to be replaced to choose the private sector if that's what they want. Now, I actually think we have moved on, because the big challenge now for the NHS is vulnerable people, particularly older people, with complex conditions, where if someone, for example, needs to have emergency care because they have dementia and they fall out of bed in the middle of the night, the concept of choice and choosing a provider is not relevant in the same way. What you need is joined-up, integrated care, and that is the big challenge. And that's what people like Marilyn want to set up.
Quick one from Andy Burnham, and then I want to hear from a patient. I want to hear from a patient. Go on, Andy Burnham.
The point that I'm making is that it is linked to the money, because the cost of tendering, as just was said, is huge across the NHS at the moment. But the other big point, and this is the philosophical point, the future, Jeremy, the future of health and care in this country is about integration. Markets deliver the opposite, fragmentation. More pieces on the pitch.
Hold that thought, because I want to bring in a patient now on this issue of fragmentation. It's Sophie Royce. And Sophie, you were unlucky enough to have bacterial meningitis, followed by septicemia. And since then, and we're not talking that long ago, you've had 27 operations.
Yeah, that's right. And
that was partly a result of the treatment being bungled. How many should you have had, basically? It was never going to be...
At the beginning, it should have just been 3. That just was my initial amputations, and then reconstructive surgery to my right foot.
So, sorry, what has been the effect on you as a patient from all of this?
Well, since then, I have been in hospital. I mean, last year I spent probably about 160 days in hospital on IV antibiotics, surgery after surgery, and it's completely changed my life.
And you've lost part of your toes and your fingers?
Yes, so I've lost all my toes, part of my right foot, and all my fingertips.
Now, what was the mistake? Was it to do with fragmentation of services that some of these problems arose? What was the problem?
Well, after the initial amputations, then in January of 2014, I got septicemia again in one of my surgical sites. And I went to my local hospital, and I got stuck there basically for 5 days whilst my thigh grew and grew and grew. And then after much calling to guys at St Thomas's, we finally got moved over there.
And so your view would be that the specialist big centres are much better than the district hospitals for the kind of complicated cases?
My consultant has really pushed for my care. But then when you need care outside of that trust, I've needed immunology appointments because we're not entirely sure where all these infections have come from. And I had to wait over a year for an appointment. And in that year, I was in hospital 9 different times for different infections.
I mean, I think the points that we get out of Sophie's case are that think about how you organise this. One of them is bigger specialist hospitals are perhaps better equipped for complicated cases than the local district hospitals. Is there the political courage out there to say, look, we're going to resist the local effort to keep the district hospital open?
The biggest point, I mean, what happened with Sophie is a terrible tragedy. The truth is, in our NHS, we had a terrible tragedy at Mid-Staffs. We have around 1,000 avoidable deaths every month. Every fortnight, we're operating somewhere in the NHS on the wrong part of someone's body. And isn't actually this what we should have been discussing for the greater part of this evening? Because this is actually about doing a better job for patients. And my worry about the whole phony argument about privatisation that isn't happening is that it is a great big distraction from what really matters to patients, which is delivering safe, effective care. And that, I think, is something we've started to do, but we've got a long, long way to go.
I'd have fascinated...
Yes, you do. I completely agree with you.
But costs money. And the workforce is saying we are not delivering safe care to patients. Patient care is suffering now because of the state it's in, and you are not.
And that's why we want to put in the £8 billion.
Why now? Why has it not been sorted? But, you know, you've been in power for 5 years. Why is patient care suffering now?
But surely then a privatisation is a phony argument. I mean, there's many other countries that have better clinical outcomes, that have more private providers.
The point I wanted to make is exactly the point about learning from other places. I had a fascinating visit to Intermountain Health, a not-for-profit integrated care organisation in Utah. They have an obsessive focus on safety, on best possible care. It's all clinician-led. And in that way, the great insight is that they end up spending less money on care because they avoid making mistakes. And your sort of case, your experience, must drive all of us to achieve the same sort of shift in the NHS.
Can we have a debate now? I think it'd be really helpful if we got to the point where we spent as much time talking about care delivery,
absolutely,
joining up care, thinking about physical, social and mental health together,
yes,
so that professionals can deliver the best possible care for patients, because that's why we're all here.
Yep.
I think that's what we all want. I think the debates that we sometimes have, which about the architecture of the NHS,
yep,
the infrastructure,
is a distraction. Do you all agree with what you've just heard Rob say? Does everybody think Rob has spoken for you all when he says that, or not? Anyone who disagrees?
I think there's still a fundamental financial problem. I mean, I suspect in Utah, and America spends 2.5 times more per capita on healthcare than we do in this country. So I'm sure, and I've worked in America. American medicine at its best is fantastic, and they're much better at safety than we are, and they're obsessional about detail.
But they saved money as a result
hugely
and achieved better care.
Part of the answer is that we have to start measuring outcomes for patients instead of being obsessed with inputs. Because every time we have this conversation, every time we have this conversation about, and of course sometimes we do need more staff, but when the whole conversation is just about we need 20,000 more doctors or just about inputs, it doesn't take into account what
I think Rob has made an important point, and I think we do need a political consensus about hospital changes, because I think the local trusts need to evolve into integrated care organisations in the way that you described, Rob, dealing with physical, mental and social care, and more than specialist services passed up to regional centres. Now, it's a myth to say politicians don't do these things, because Jeremy's taken some difficult decisions, and I did a reform on stroke in London. I think, you know, it was a forerunner of the programme that was described earlier, where we centralised. It's been a big success, and so we do take, and that was just before the last election. So I think we need a better political consensus about how hospitals are going to evolve from this 20th century model into a 21st century model of integrated care.
So this is why the non-partisan commission.
I think
exactly.
There's a huge amount of agreement.
Exactly.
The market's the big disagreement.
This is so politicised.
The market is the big disagreement.
Everything gets exaggerated.
Yeah,
exactly.
While we were assessing about
just a quick word from Jeremy Hunt and then Norman.
But while we were assessing about should we have more markets or less markets, you know, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, for 4 years we had mid-staffs going on between 2005 and 2009, and no one spotted it.
Norman Lamb,
last word. I think we're ending this discussion, actually, with the recognition that we do need to come together, and this idea of the Commission this year to engage with staff is the way that we can come up with the real solutions.
Norman Lamb, thank you all very much. And that's it from the Macmillan Cancer Centre at University College Hospital. I need to thank the panel. Thank you all very much. And, of course, the politicians. Tomorrow is the night of the big election question time with David Cameron, Ed Miliband and Nick Clegg. And Kirsty will be in the Newsnight studio to dissect it at 10:30. To be there. And if you want more of an insight into the issues thrown up by the election, you can go to bbc.co.uk/Newsnight, to our live blog, which many of us contribute to from time to time. Goodbye.